Thanks for joining me for Classical Art Tips. Today we'll look at painting books on a shelf. And I'm Meryl Ann Butler, oceanviewarts.com. So here's a student's painting of books on a shelf that they asked about how they could make it look a little more realistic. Now they have a really good start here, so I'm really glad to see that. And there are a few things that can be done to get closer to what their idea of three-dimensional look. So we will take a look at those. I don't have a reference image. When I do these, if there's a reference image, it does make it a little bit easier, but we can always do it without that. So the first thing we'll look at is linear perspective, which is part of the drawing. So drawing is the first step and values are the second. So in linear perspective, this particular situation is 1-point perspective. And the classic image we always see is railroad tracks going to a point, receding to a point on the horizon. And we know that those railroad tracks don't get smaller and smaller as they go back. So we are looking at an optical illusion. And in 1-point perspective, parallel lines appear to recede to a vanishing point on the horizon, which is the same as your eye level. So here we'll look at the vanishing points. We have the horizon or eye level at the top. So this would be kind of standing or seated with our eye level a little above the books. And you want to think of this group of books kind of as if they were encased in one cube, and then maybe each book also separately as cubes. Now, the books with the stars on them are the ones that conform to the perspective in this particular image. In other words, they all go to that vanishing point on that eye level. The books without the stars, those lines are not conforming close enough. And even the ones with the stars, the book on the left, the very far outside line is perfect. The line that's closer in is a little bit, needs to be adjusted, but it's close, it's close. So now what we're going to do is if we move the eye level down, then some of the other books will conform to perspective. Whoops. And there we have it at the lowest level. So let me go back a minute. These 3 books on the right conform to this lower eye level, and they appear to recede to that vanishing point above in the center of the horizon. And then when we even lower the horizon line even more, then we have a couple of 2 books on the left, the red one and the black one. Their perspective lines conform to this. But our eye level could not be there because that is below the top of the books. And since we are actually seeing the top of the book on the left and the book on the right, the larger ones, that means our horizon line wouldn't be there. So out of all of these, I would probably go with this one, our first one, and I would use the lines that are accurate, and then the ones that aren't, I just adjust them. Now, feedback is not only designed for the particular painting that you're looking at, it's really more for the future. Some students may want to adjust the painting that they're getting feedback for, but you don't have to. You can just keep what you learn in mind for the next painting that you do that's similar. This student, however, may want to adjust this because there's not that much adjusting to do to really make it look like what they wanted it to look like. So they might elect to do that, but that's up to them. The idea is to learn from every painting you do, whether you complete it to perfection or not. So the next thing we want to ask ourselves is, where is the light coming from? And that's a little hard to tell in this. Let's see, we have another slide. We have a couple of hints. So the yellow arrow up there is showing us to the right-hand side of the spine of that book is a little darker than the left. So that would indicate that maybe the light's coming from the left. And the blue arrow shows us that the book is a little darker on that side. So that would give us a little bit of that idea. None of the other books really have a clear sense of which way the light might be coming from. The shelf that they're sitting on does, because the top of the shelf is a little lighter and the front side of the shelf is a little darker. So that indicates that the light's kind of coming from above. So from these two indications, we'll just decide that the light is kind of coming from above and to the left. So then we'll look at value relationships, because that's what's going to make it look more 3D and realistic. So if we look at the books on the left, this is a photograph, and this shows books with light coming from the kind of upper left direction. And you'll see that the values on the spine of the book kind of change. Now in the center, we have a sphere. And the sphere is drawn with classical light, shadow, and reflected light on it. So the light is on the left, the shadow's in the center, and reflected light is on the right-hand side. And so we see on the painting on the right, we don't have much of an indication of that. And that's why it doesn't look like it has light on it yet. So we're going to see how we can adjust that. So again, here you'll compare the portion of the cylinder, which these rounded book spines are actually kind of an arc of a cylinder. And you will notice that they have light on the left, for most of them, a darker value in the center and a little bit of a lighter value on the right for reflected light. You can see that especially in the red one, the Aristotle physics one, and the blue one in the center, the light blue. So I took some pieces of the books in the photo and lined them up with the books in the painting. So you can see how you could add values and blended edges to create the feeling of the spines of those books kind of reaching out towards us and being a little rounded. So, okay, what are we doing? Oh, okay, here we go. So we're going back to see what it looked like at the beginning. And this gives you a little bit of an idea of how those spines would look. Now, not all these values are correct. I'm just dropping some values on top of this in a very primitive program. But it does give you the feeling of the spines of those books kind of moving towards us, you know, reaching out towards us and having shadow on one side and a little bit of reflected light. So that is one step towards more realism here. Now here, all these arrows are pointing to places where there would be a cast shadow, because if the light's coming from the left, for instance, the brown book on the left would be casting a shadow on the red book, because the red book is shorter and it's behind that. And the same thing with the next two books. There's kind of a black book and then next to a navy blue book, and the navy blue book is real short, so you'd get a cast shadow there. And so we're going to look at all these places and notice what will happen when we put cast shadows. So there's the cast shadows. So immediately that gives you a sense of distance and direction. And again, keep in mind, I'm just dropping basic shapes. None of this is refined to the exact shape, but if you squint your eyes and look at this, you will get a feeling of the overall effect. So the other thing you can do is look at other great painters' paintings of the subject matter that you're working with. This is Bookshelves with Music Writings by Giuseppe Maria Crespi from 1730. And we'll look at the top little oval there, we see there's a little cast shadow under that book. Now that book is sticking out past the edge of the shelf. And in our student painting on the left, none of those books are sticking out from the shelf, so they wouldn't have that cast shadow, but I'm just pointing that out so you can see it. However, underneath there, you can see these books leaning towards each other. And when they're leaning on another book and they're sticking out a little further, you can see how they cast a shadow. Now they cast a little bit different shadow than what we had on ours because these books are leaning, but it is a reminder that they will be casting shadows. Now these books will also cast some shadows in the little blank spaces. So we're going to look at the yellow arrows, the little navy blue book in the middle and then the lighter tan book on the right are both sticking out towards us a little further than the book that's immediately to the right. So there would be a little cast shadow there. So you want to look at those two spots and see what happens when we get a little cast shadow on there. It starts to give a feeling of atmosphere and depth in there. And again, you want to kind of squint your eyes and look at the values rather than the exact detail of my shapes, which are not very accurate. So then in the photo, we notice that underneath the books is a little bit of a dark shadow, which we do not have in the painting. And there will be a very, very skinny dark shadow under the books, which if you added that, it would help the books look like they are sitting down flat and not floating. That's not something I was able to do with my fairly primitive program here. So I'm just pointing that out, that if you do a little bit of a dark line like you see in the photograph under those books and also in the previous painting, you'll notice that. And here's another painting, and you'll notice that even though this book on the right is sitting flat down on the table, it does have that very skinny dark shadow under it that makes it feel like it's actually sitting on the table rather than floating. So then we're going to look at the ledge, or the actual bookshelf. And when we look at the student painting on the left, we see that that's one solid value, and it makes it look flat, and it may have been very flat. In Giuseppe Maria Crespi's painting on the right, we have the feeling of it being slightly rounded, which is a nice look. And so when we look at the charcoal drawing of the cylinder on the right, we see that we kind of have that gradation going on with the edge of the bookshelf, with a little light at the top and a little bit darker, like a shadow in the middle, and a little reflected light at the bottom. So that follows the feeling of form that we get in classical form making. And it would be, if that shelf is a little bit curved, it would be like a section of a cylinder. And we see this up close here. And we also notice there's a little bit of a highlight at the very top where that plane breaks, where the vertical plane hits the horizontal plane. It's subtle, but it's important. And so on this one, I have added that to the student's painting on just the right-hand side, as you see by the yellow arrow. So we see a little bit of the shadow and reflected light there, and a little bit of the highlight along the top. And you can see how that gives an additional feeling of form to that shelf. So here we have the finished sketch, which on the left has the additions that I've made, which give an additional feeling of form by adding light and shadow. Wasn't able to adjust the perspective, but I did adjust some of the values. And when you compare it to the one on the right, especially if you squint your eyes, you'll notice a feeling of more of three-dimensional form on the left. Now, I have not adjusted every value, and not all these values are correct. Some of them are a little, the left-hand side of the books are a little too light and a little too white. You would want to adjust that more, keeping in mind with the color of the book. But the idea here is to show a few steps that you could use to enhance the feeling of form. And if you squint your eyes, I think you'll notice that the books on the left appear to have more 3 dimensions. So thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. I appreciate it. And then I can make more videos like this. And I offer private lessons, consultations, and friendly feedback like this via Zoom, live on Zoom, and video recordings. So thanks again for coming and for watching, and I appreciate your interest in classical art. Thank you.